Business athletes, what is happening? Coming at you with another great episode today. This one is From Medicated to Optimized, Rebuilding Brain Chemistry the Right Way. And it's all around this question of, can you get off psychiatric medications? And my personal experience in optimizing brain chemistry the business athlete way. This is going to be a good one. And this one, I will tell you, even if you're not on psych meds, antidepressants, anti-anxiety drugs, ADHD medications, even if you're not on those things, this will still be a very good one for you because a lot of the tools, principles, and tactics I talk about are just geared around how do you optimize your brain health in general. So even if you haven't taken those things, your brain health, if you haven't consciously done a lot of the things that I'm going to be talking here about, you won't be performing at your best. You absolutely won't. And you won't even realize it. And so I want to give you a quick backstory because you might be saying, Fraser, I get it, but I've been medicated for years. This is just the way I am. I'm glad that you were able to get off stuff, but this is just the way I am. First of all, you've got to let go of any narrative that you have that this is some life sentence for you. If you argue for your limitations, guess what? You get to keep them. And so I've always been one. That's one of the things that I had going for me. As a young guy, total disaster of a person at the time, like unsuccessful in everything I did, sucked in school, sucked with the ladies, didn't look like I worked out at all, was like skinny fat, pimples, just a doofus. One thing I had going for me was I typically wanted to buck the system. So if someone said to me, you've been diagnosed with bipolar depression, this is something you're going to have to manage for the rest of your life, part of me was like, yeah, right, you watch me. And I don't know where that came from, but I will say that it is a very important perspective you have to nurture, because if you keep telling yourself that you're broken and that this is just the way you are, you will just live into that identity constantly. You'll live into that label. And so you can obviously do that if you want, knock yourself out. But this is for the business athletes and the pros that want to get to that next level and do it the right way and perform at the highest level and just be a total linchpin in your life, in your community, in your business, whatever you're doing. So my backstory, just in a compressed version, so you know that I've walked this path. When I was in my early teens, I'm 41 now, I was diagnosed with severe depression, ADHD, and severe social anxiety. It kind of metastasized over the years. So from the age of about 12 or 13, all the way through to, I would say, about 20 to 21 years old, I struggled a lot. And towards the end of that time, I would say from about 18 onwards, I was eventually diagnosed with bipolar depression. Initially, it was just chronic depression, and then it sort of turned into this bipolar status. I was diagnosed with ADHD, and I was diagnosed with severe social anxieties. I was medicated for all of these things, and I tried a lot of different medications. I'd been on earlier in the game. I'd been on a lot of the lighter substances. From memory, it may have changed now because it's been a while, but things like citalopram and just like your mild SSRI antidepressants. And I would use smaller doses of Ritalin. What I found is that as things evolved for me, I ended up sort of progressing and getting worse. But the dosing of the medication also seemed to need to be increased. Go figure, right? So towards the end of this chapter, I was consuming about 100 milligrams of Ritalin a day, which is a pretty gnarly dose. And I'm going to talk to you about some of the side effects and things that I experienced with that for each thing. So you kind of know, like, if you even want to use medications, you probably need to be more informed. Because one of the things that I found was that as well-intentioned as psychiatrists are, they often don't ask the right questions. And I'll give you a litmus test on how you determine if your specialist, your expert, is someone that is actually taking your context into consideration. It'll probably blow your mind, to be honest, because I guarantee they probably haven't. So when I was on for bipolar depression, initially I was on Prozac, and then I got on lithium carbonate. And I was on lithium carbonate, high doses of Ritalin, and I was on clonazepam. And so I believe clonazepam is Klonopin, essentially. It's the different name. But anyway, all this to say, benzodiazepines are very, very addictive. And essentially when I look back now, I realize it was like uppers and downers. At the time, I didn't know what uppers and downers were. Uppers are things that kind of rev up your nervous system. So that's your ADHD and ADD medications, your Adderall, your Ritalin, things like that. And then your downers are your benzodiazepines and things that sedate you, sleep aids, basically. And so what happens with a lot of people, and I would say that there's probably a lot of professionals and business athlete type people that have gone through these challenges where you might be sort of stuck in this upper and downer cycle where you are using ADHD medications and caffeine to get yourself going through the day. And then you're so wired that if you don't use sleep aids and a bunch of melatonin and benzodiazepines at nighttime, you just can't sleep. Now, there is obviously the pharmaceutical pathway, which is what I just mentioned, but there's also the more street drug pathway, which is going to be things like alcohol and cannabis and, probably even just using Ritalin and Adderall. But your downers are going to be your alcohol and your cannabis and stuff like that. So I say all this because that was the sort of roller coaster that I found myself on. And at the time, I was never asked by my psychiatrist or medical doctors. I was never asked about my diet. I never had extensive blood work run to really see all the mechanisms in the body. It was just very basic stuff. But I did get blood work run often because we were often checking organ markers like liver function and kidney, because some of these medications are quite toxic. And so if you're using them often, they may want to run certain organ systems to make sure you're not getting toxicity in your organs. That's not a good sign. That right away was a red flag, and I did not pick up on it. When I was younger, I just believed the system. I just thought these people are trained in what they do. They must have more knowledge than me, and I will just believe what they say. And I remember them saying things like, this is just the way you are. Your mom was like this, and this kind of runs in your family. Like, let's just do our best to manage this. And I would say that's a narrative that a lot of people fall into. And I genuinely don't think that has to be your story. And I would actually tell you this. Not only if you wanted to get off any medications you're on, not only do I think you could get off them, I actually think you could end up optimizing yourself even more and perform better mentally, feel better mentally, have more control over your anxiety, and have more mental clarity and mental acuity and sharpness than you've ever had before. I genuinely think that. And I actually have many students that have come through me. Usually there could be a one-on-one or business athlete counsel, because at those levels, I can offer a little bit more of a nuanced guidance. And I've seen the benefits. I've seen people with the first-hand result of this. So I say this because at a certain point in my journey, I started to realize, okay, this is not working. My diet was terrible. I ate like crap. I was at the extreme end of the spectrum. You probably wouldn't believe me if I told you. I mean, I used to chain smoke. I chain smoked for a number of years. I worked in a butchery, and I just remember every day for lunch and dinner, I would just eat pizza and pies and stuff, baked goods. I had zero understanding of nutrition. And I didn't take any supplements, so I took no supplements. I took no understanding of nutrition. I didn't exercise. I didn't think about getting sun exposure, or, I didn't really think about sleep. I drank a lot, so I really started to sort of abuse the stuff that I was on too. I literally would use them as uppers and downers, and they just kind of sink their hooks into you. And at a certain point, I just thought to myself, man, if I keep going down this path, what is my life going to look like? I wasn't even thinking about high performance and success at this point. I wasn't thinking, man, I wonder what I need to do in my business to bring enough value to get to a $50 million a year level. I was just thinking to myself, man, I just need to get through this paycheck to paycheck week and make sure I have enough money for alcohol. It was that bad. And so I'm coming from the extreme end of the spectrum. Many of you listening to this are not going to be there, thank goodness. And even if you are, recognize I've been there and you can absolutely do this, but you need to put your head down. You need to focus, okay? So I realized that I need to figure this out. And I also realized that the system obviously doesn't know everything. And this was back before before social media was a main thing. You got to realize my generation came from right on that cusp of before the age of social media being a normal thing. And so YouTube and podcasts you couldn't just go on and get all this type of information that's on the Business Athlete podcast. Unless you had a book at the library or you knew someone that had personally achieved the result you wanted, like you were kind of screwed. You couldn't just plug this in on YouTube and find stuff. This was in the very early stages of YouTube. So I didn't know that diet had a massive effect on psychology. I didn't know that there's things you could do to improve chemistry. I didn't know any of this. I thought it was all genetic and it was all just luck of the draw, and I'm just a dumbass. That's what I thought. And as I got into my 20s, I remember as I started to get more and more into health and fitness, I started to just notice and learn about how I felt better when I got more consistent with my training. It was little things. Obviously, over time, you clean the diet up a little bit. You start getting outside and going to the beach a bit more. Back when I was in New Zealand, you start to be more consistent with your workouts. And you just feel in general, hey, if I go back and I reflect on how I was feeling a year ago, I do feel better. I have noticed some changes. And at a certain point, I thought to myself, if I ever want to actualize my potential, I need to be the guy that walks this path less traveled. I essentially need to carve a path for myself and then show people the way if they want to come. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to jump in. So now I've been off all the psych meds for 13 years. So I was using these things through my 20s, but I was on a sort of a journey of discovery. So I remember that over time I would decrease the dosage of things. Initially, I got off the Ritalin, so I was still using the anxiety medications and the bipolar one, and then I got off the anti-anxiety stuff. So the last thing that I was on was the lithium carbonate for bipolar depression. And so I sort of went through this self-discovery process, and I tried many things. And one of the best things about this podcast is I'm going to be able to compress down for you all the big levers that you need to pull and address and think about if you ever want to make this work for you. And like I said, even if you aren't on stuff, most people don't feel great. I would say most people that I come into contact with, they have some type of mental health issues, and they don't realize how much better they could feel if they lock themselves in. So what I'm going to do is I want to go through like some key pillars. I've got a bunch of show notes here, so I may jump around a little bit, but each pillar, they all tie together. So they all tie together, and that's the thing to remember. So the first thing to understand is that when it comes to brain chemistry, think of yourself like a walking, breathing chemical factory. Everything you do, everything you eat, the stuff you consume nutritionally, the stuff you consume digitally, your light exposure, your sleep exposure, your stress state, all of these things have an effect on the chemistry in your brain and body. And so chemistry being your brain chemicals, so dopamine, serotonin, GABA, and acetylcholine. Now, outside of that, it's going to be all the hormonal systems, all the blood work stuff. So it's going to be sex hormones, testosterone, DHEA, estrogen, pregnenolone, progesterone. Those things also have an effect. So you've got these different chemical systems in the body, and combined, they create a state. And so if you are not eating well and you're inside all day and you're staying up late and you're watching really stressful horror movies and you're ranting and complaining about politics all the time, you're going to create a chemical state in your brain and in your hormonal system that's really de-optimized and congruent with feeling like trash. That's why people have issues. And so I would say in terms of chemicals in the body, it's going to be created by nutrients, macronutrients, micronutrients. So protein, carbs, and fats. It's going to be created by micronutrients, vitamins and minerals. That's why I always say eat the rainbow. That's part of it. Amino acids, sleep, light, stress state, training, conversations that you're having, your breathing. Like all of these things are all levers that you can pull to literally get a chemical squirt of a certain thing. And so what I started to realize was I thought to myself, okay, if all these different habits and behaviors and foods give me a little chemical squirt, a little injection of dopamine or a little injection of acetylcholine, how do I figure out like where to begin? How do I figure out like what the issues are? And so the first thing that I would tell you to do is get online and do the Braverman test. The Braverman test, Braverman, Braverman test. It's a neurotransmitter mapping test. It is subjective, meaning they're not going to take a brain scan and they're not going to take blood work or anything. It's a bunch of questions, but I actually find this quite useful because it's an easy win. You can do it right now, and it generally gives you a good representation of what's happening neurochemically in your brain. And what I find often is that your typical professionals, business owners, aspiring high performers, your business athlete types, they tend to have a certain brain chemical pattern that's almost like an identifying state. And it's acetylcholine dominance and GABA deficient. Now, I find a lot of people are basically deficient in everything. So all their brain chemicals are just like taxed and depleted because they haven't been eating well, they haven't been sleeping well, they haven't been doing most things well, and so their body's just drained of all the chemicals and nutrients. You see this with hormonal profiles too. If someone's like starving themselves and trying to diet down for fat loss, and they're just dieting, you see all their hormone levels start to tank. And so the combination of a tanked hormone profile with poor brain chemicals, you're going to feel like garbage. And then you're going to go to the doctor and they're going to tell you got X, Y, and Z ailments, not realizing that that's just a temporary state that you're in based on all the levers you've been pulling. That's the thing you've got to remember. Bipolar depression or anxiety or ADHD, it's not something that you're stuck with forever. It's a set of levers that you are inadvertently pulling all your. You know, sometimes if you have an addictive behavior, you know it's not good for you, but it's causing a downstream response that's driving that chemical state. And so the Braverman test gives you an idea of where all those brain chemicals are at. That's a good place to begin because straight away when you do that test, it's going to give you your GABA, your acetylcholine, your dopamine, your serotonin values approximately. It'll tell you if you're in like a severe deficit or a mild deficit or if it's normal. Most people I find have a lot of severe deficiencies. And so straight away, I know that your mental health problems are almost situational based off you not understanding all the different tools in the toolbox you actually have at your disposal to help improve them. Like if you know, for example, that sunlight exposure and walking help stimulate some of these systems, you would be more proactive about adding that in multiple times per day. A lot of the things that I talk about and preach in my coaching models, and any of you guys who are in my tribe, you will know this to be true. I preach about a lot of certain things repetitively because they are the things that will optimize your chemistry. They optimize your mitochondrial health, they optimize your hormonal systems, they optimize your insulin sensitivity, and they optimize your brain chemistry. And when you start getting those things right, you start feeling better. You'll feel less anxious. you'll be in a better mood. Your mood will be more stable. You'll have more mental energy through the day. So when you're in that place, you will get more done and you'll feel better about your life, and that's when everything starts to click into place. It's easier to get in shape when you feel good. If you're feeling miserable and terrible, it's pretty damn hard to want to get in shape. Pretty damn hard. So you got to work from the inside out. So the first thing is the Braverman test, because that's going to give you a ballpark. Now, what I will do with my students, for example, is we'll get them to run, especially if you're in the Business Athlete Council. By the way, get into the tribe, man. Get into my 6-week Anomaly Project course just to start. Get your feet wet. And if you want to be that higher level professional, get in the Business Athlete Council. Because in there, we will run through the Braverman test stuff. I have people post their data and I give you strategic feedback on where to focus first. And it's very effective. So the first thing is when you get that testing done, it's going to give you some feedback around the types of foods and the types of supplements that you can start splicing into your routine to start improving those chemical states. So, for example, like I always say, like food is like software, and your body and mind are the hardware. And so people don't realize that certain foods and certain things will elicit certain chemical changes. For example, sweet potato has been shown to help improve serotonin response. So someone might strategically add in a little bit of sweet potato with a dinner meal to help improve that serotonin output, right? So there's different things. Acetylcholine ties back into choline. So any choline-based foods, whole eggs, for example, is one that people might consume. There's different things for different systems in the body. And so not only can you add in certain foods, but you can add in certain supplements too. You can stack both. And certain like habits, lifestyle habits. And when you start stacking those, that's when you'll start to see those positive shifts. And as you get, because think about this, your neurochemicals in your brain is like the braking system and the accelerator of an engine of a vehicle. Acetylcholine is like the accelerator of the brain. GABA is like the braking system. And what did I just say before? That a lot of people, probably you, are acetylcholine dominant and GABA deficient. So basically, that's all gas and no brakes. That's someone who is anxious, someone who is OCD, someone who is manic and quite frenetic. They're flustered. They get stressed out easily. They're quite anxious. You run anxious, and you struggle to turn the noise down in your head. You struggle to wind down and calm down. You might notice you don't sleep well. You might notice that you get a lot of digestive issues. That's that issue from not having enough of a braking system. So I say all this because you've got to realize that when you see the mind almost like an engine and a transmission, these tools are the start point to help optimize the way you drive that vehicle. And I'm telling you now, I've got to the point now where I'm really far into this journey where I still will have moments where I don't feel great, but I know exactly what I need to do to course correct it quickly. You will never cross a finish line where you're done. You're like, I'm done now. I've done all the work. It's not a finish line. It's a moving target. You just get better at hitting the moving target. So you get more proficient at hitting the target quickly rather than thinking that you cross some line where you're done and you can just relax and enjoy life from here on out. It doesn't work that way. It's a moving target. And so the first thing is the Braverman test. The second thing is you need to get comprehensive blood work done. I talk about comprehensive blood work in, I believe, episode 3. Go back and listen to that because I will tell you that one of the big challenges is people that will give you Ritalin or an antidepressant are usually just like general practitioners. They're not even psychiatrists. So they're just a family doctor. They don't actually have a lot of knowledge on brain chemistry. They have very little knowledge on health and nutrition. And so you're essentially getting a prescription from someone that has almost no actual knowledge around the science of neurobiology. But they're giving you, they're diagnosing you and prescribing you with things. So you've got to realize, in a way, it's like the blind leading the blind. Some of these people aren't bad, and they're well-intentioned. And they're doing the best that they can generally. But they don't learn a lot of these things in college. They have a few hours of nutritional knowledge. There's no way that you can be highly skilled at what you do if you don't have a deep understanding of nutrition. At that point, you're just treating symptoms. You don't understand root cause medicine at all. And so that's why I even have doctors who will come to me for consultations, because they realize that that's a missing piece of their puzzle. And the best teachers are also the best students. And that's why I commend some of these people, because they can eat that humble pie and come to a nutritionist to learn these things. I think it's fantastic. But the thing is like, even when I went to a psychiatrist, so the psychologists will treat you with like cognitive behavioral therapy. Psychiatrists, they're the ones that will diagnose or prescribe you with medications. So I went to a psychologist to do cognitive behavioral therapy, and I went to a psychiatrist for the medications. Now, even then, I didn't even get blood work run to get my initial diagnosis. They sat me down and they asked me a bunch of questions. And based off those subjective responses, they diagnosed me with all these different things. So they didn't even like try to look at the comprehensive blood work. And I never remember getting comprehensive blood work run. We would run basic metabolic panels that had your ALT and AST, like liver enzymes and kidney markers, creatinine and BUN, blood urea nitrogen levels and stuff like that. But they never ran sex hormones or insulin sensitivity or different inflammatory markers in the body. And see, now in hindsight, when I want to help someone with a situation like this, I want to know, where is their vitamin D status at? Vitamin D plays an intimate role in mental health, an intimate role in testosterone production, and an intimate role in immune system health. So that's why people often get seasonal depression, because it's not the season per se. It's because their vitamin D status drops so much in winter because they're not getting enough sun exposure. And so simply by using the right amount of vitamin D3 plus K2 supplementation, you could potentially avoid a lot of the seasonal issues that you think happen to you every year just because. So the first thing is like vitamin D. Second thing is vitamin B12, folate, iron and ferritin, thyroid metabolism, so TSH, T3 and T4, fasting insulin, C-reactive protein. It's like an inflammation marker in your body. The more inflammation you have systemically, you're going to feel like crap. Your brain will be inflamed. And when your brain's inflamed, you will think inflammatory thoughts. Testosterone, estrogen balance, DHEA and pregnenolone. So you can see here that I would probably tell you that unless you've intentionally gone to get these labs run, any doctor, a physician who's diagnosed you with anything and given you psychiatric medications, I guarantee didn't look at all this stuff. I guarantee it. I never come across this. This is why this matters so much, because if you don't know these things, you are just guessing. It's guesswork at that point, and that's why people struggle so much, because what happens is you start getting medicated for an issue that's not even what it looks like. A really common example is ADHD. I truly believe that most people don't actually have ADHD and ADD. I think they have insulin resistance. They have really high fasting glucose levels. Their blood sugar levels are very unstable, so the hemoglobin A1C is high. Their fasting insulin sucks. And so they're very metabolically inflamed. And all of that roller coaster of the blood sugar and up and down, that's what causes the brain fog. That's what causes the inability to concentrate and focus. And I often see this, and I know this is true because when I have looked at people with children and we clean up the kid's diet, all of a sudden the child behaves way better because now they're getting a much more stable blood glucose response. It's not all up and down like a roller coaster. So that's a good example of if they actually ran fasting insulin, hemoglobin A1C, and glucose, and C-reactive protein for inflammation, they would be able to determine, hey, you're really insulin resistant. Let's focus on getting you insulin sensitive first before we start throwing Ritalin or Adderall at the problem. And so what happens is it doesn't get rid of your insulin resistance. Now you're taking a stimulant, which is going to proliferate some of that insulin resistance because there's more of a stress response in the body. And so it magnifies the problem. And before you know it, you're a 30 or 40, 50-year-old person on a cocktail of medications that all have contraindications with each other, and they're all like used to counteract each other. It's insane. Absolutely insane. So you can fix this. Believe me when I say that. So the second thing is detailed blood work. Like I mentioned, episode 3, I cover it. And like I would say, get into the Business Athlete Council or reach out to me for some one-on-one, because I can look at your stuff. And from that, what I did was when I got my own labs done, I would look at where everything is at, and I would start to reverse engineer the types of nutrition, foods, diets, macros, food choices, supplements that are needed to not only help improve those brain chemicals from the Braverman test, but to help improve all those different systems in the blood work. So you're not just addressing one thing. If you just address the blood work, but you don't address the Braverman test, you're leaving a whole bunch of results on the table. And there's more. There's more than that too. So the next part of it is to understand your food sensitivity and hair mineral analysis. And the reason why this is important is because, one, if you're eating healthy foods that you think are good for you, but you have a sensitivity to them, that's a degree of inflammation. And when you have that inflammatory response, you're going to drive up brain fog and anxiety and mood swings. So that's why I really encourage people to not just think about their diet as macros and calories. You've got to get away from that old bodybuilding mindset of macros and calories where you're eating, tofu or chicken and broccoli with sweet potato and Skippy's peanut butter and your typical Quaker's rice cakes and Quaker oatmeal and just like your stock standard bro fitness diet. That's part of the problem, because that's going to have things you're more than likely going to be triggering off sensitivities that's exacerbating how you feel. So food sensitivity testing, that's a good one to get, because there is almost always foods that we think are healthy that are actually kicking off an inflammatory response. And the other part of that is that hair mineral analysis. Now, the reason why this is important, like I say, is food is like software. And so your different vitamins and minerals drive different functions in the body. So magnesium, helps with, it's GABA support. It's a calming agent on your nervous system. Zinc, it helps with dopamine regulation. Selenium, it helps with thyroid metabolism. And that's like the thermostat of your body. B vitamins, that helps with methylation of neurotransmitters in general, metabolizing them. Omega-3s help with membrane fluidity. So just basically how cells communicate with each other. You want good cellular communication. Like I mentioned, vitamin D, that helps with mood regulation. It drives testosterone function. And so all of these different things in the body, these vitamins and minerals, will create some type of chemical response. And so if we know this, can you imagine how accurate you can get with your diet if you know what you need to change in your blood work, and you know what you need to change with your Braverman test, and you've got the minerals and vitamin analysis, and you can see what areas you're low in, like are you low in magnesium, or are you low in iron, or are you low in zinc, and then you got your food sensitivity. So you can find better food swaps for the things that you maybe were eating every day that were kicking off an inflammatory response. And not only the minerals that I mentioned when it comes to hair mineral analysis, but the ratios of minerals too. Like people don't realize, like minerals, they pair together. There's a synergist effect. Copper pairs with zinc, right? So you got to realize that there's different calcium pairs with magnesium. And so if you are low in one, you might need to optimize both. Now, you won't know that unless you get these types of tests done. Now, if you want not even an easier way, but a quicker way to do it, what I would suggest you do is track your calories on, say, Chronometer or MyFitnessPal for a week. And at the end of the week, look at the daily averages. So it's going to give you your daily recommended intakes for all your different vitamins and minerals. Look at your daily averages over the course of a week. And if there's anything that you can see you're consistently low on, you want to plug those holes with a food or supplement. Now, that's why I'm such a big fan of my macro bowl concept. I've done the episode on macro bowls, because that way you can sort of troubleshoot your chemistry by adding in specific foods into your macro bowls that help basically nurture that chemical lever you need to pull. Food is like software, guys, and your body and mind are the hardware. And do you want to put a good operating system update on your laptop, or do you want to keep putting freaking malware on your computer and it crashes and it glitches and it freezes? The brain fog, the anxiety, the low mood, that's the crash, the glitch, and the freeze. That people will often say to me, dude, how do you get so much done? And how do you I've had people come out for private days with me, right? And we'll be deep into the private day. It'll be late in the afternoon. And I'm still just going. And I can tell they're getting jaded. You know, at a certain point, we've got to take these little breaks to let their brain kind of reset. And I've had many people say, when you share this online, I thought, you were probably being truthful. But I had no idea that you performed this high all the time. And I'm like, this is an example of someone who has mastered the idea of what it looks like to pull the right levers. I am not special. Believe me when I say that. I would actually tell you that my genetic base is quite crappy. Like my body is very prone to being suboptimal. If I don't do all of these things, my physiology and psychology would turn to crap fast. It's almost like I have to do these things because I don't give myself a choice. I realize if I was to eat just emotionally and stay up late and do a lot of the goofy stuff, my state would deteriorate so quickly that life would be really difficult. And I think about that effect on my children. I think about that effect on my wife, my family. So when you're thinking about why should you be doing this, obviously think about the impact you're having on the people around you. Because if you're a miserable prick, and you probably don't even realize it a lot of the time, but people are going to be repelled from you. And that you're never going to have a beautiful life when you're in that energetic state. That's why I talk about being a lighthouse. Right? Being a lighthouse is like just being this shining example of what's possible. And realize that you're a work in progress. And like I said, you don't cross the finish line, but you get better at hitting the moving target. Now, the next part of that puzzle, so we've got those testing components done, right? The next part of that puzzle is going to be your gut-brain axis. So most people don't realize that about 90% of your serotonin is actually produced and housed in your gut. So very often what you will find is that people that have gut issues also have psychological issues. I would say that in many cases, people that have gut issues are quite sort of manic, overthinking, ADHD type characters. And it's almost like a chicken or the egg thing. What came first? Are they being so mentally manic and stressful mentally that it's stressing out their nervous system so much that it's affecting their gut? Or is their gut de-optimized and that's wrecking their serotonin production, which is creating a massive imbalance, which is causing the mental issues? I think it's a vortex. It's a feedback system. They both fuel each other, which is kind of the unfortunate part, is that it can be quite a negative or positive feedback system, a loop. And so what I often do when I have someone come to me and I know they have gut issues, I will often address the gut issues almost first. That's almost one of the first things that we'll address, because I realize that when you start to improve the gut, you'll typically improve someone's psychology pretty fast. Now, it's not all the time, but it will happen. So the first thing you want to focus on is, especially if you've used a lot of antibiotics, antacids, Tums, Nexium, you've drunk lots of alcohol, or you eat a lot of processed foods, you will definitely need to work on your gut health. I've done episodes on gut health. I talk about gut health a lot. You've got your mouth, you've got your oral microbiome, you've got your stomach acid concentrations, you've got the digestive enzymes in your mouth that break food down, and you've got your gut flora in your intestine. Now, what I would say, just to give you a quick summary, is make sure you clean up your oral microbiome. Stop using Listerine, stop using Crest toothpaste and all that garbage. Use better products, so things like Riven mouthwash, Revitin or Gutology toothpaste. Those are going to be the things that help cultivate better oral microbiome, because your gut gets seeded from your mouth first. The oral microbiome mixes with the food that travels into your gut, and that essentially starts to seed and fuel your digestive system. People don't even know that. And the other part of it is digestive enzymes. You need to either chew your food more or take some type of digestive enzyme to help break your food down so you absorb it properly. Because remember, we're not just what we eat, we're what we absorb. Most people have an absorption issue. That's part of the problem. So we want to make sure that you're absorbing well. Part of that absorption is taking do a stomach acid baking soda test. So on YouTube, search stomach acid baking soda test. Do that test. If you pass, great. If you come up as needing support, betaine, HCl, and pepsin. You need to improve the concentrations and the quality of your stomach acid because you're not breaking your food down properly. So your food is hitting your digestive system and it's just sitting in your gut fermenting, aka bloating gas. We want to cultivate a better microbiome. So things like seed symbiotic, lots of microdosing in good quality fermented foods. Fermented foods and fiber, specifically Eat the Rainbow. But you've got to microdose fermented foods in because if you throw in too much too fast, your body you'll bloat. So things like natto and miso, sauerkraut, kimchi, kombucha, kefir, that's all the type of stuff that I would say microdose it in alongside a good gut rehab protocol. In fact, in my Business Athlete Council, I have protocols for all these things. So if you need the protocols to start these processes, get in there for heaven's sakes. Fiber is another thing. A lot of people will avoid fiber. They'll do a sort of a carnivore diet because that feels better on their gut. That's just avoiding the problem. You're not actually getting to the root. You're just addressing the symptom. When you optimize and heal your gut, you can actually take fiber in. And that's very, very good for cancer prevention. It's very good for insulin sensitivity. And it's very good for improving the microbiome diversity of your gut. One marker that can be worth testing is TMAO. So TMAO is a marker that will be representative of how much bacteria you have in your gut that's like negative bacteria. So that's another thing you can check in the blood work. But the main thing is a gut rehab protocol, using seed symbiotic or some other good probiotic, using betaine HCl for stomach acid concentrations, using a digestive enzyme. Things like glutamine and aloe vera can help sort of reintegrate the gut lining. Dr. Zach Bush has a product called Ion Biome that helps with that leaky gut reintegration again as well. But the whole point is you need to play with your diet and you need to troubleshoot it because as you heal your gut, you will start to reduce that inflammatory signal from the vagus nerve to your brain that's driving some of these issues. Often your sleep will improve too. So that's a big part of it. Now, another part of this is going to be your mitochondrial health. Like I mentioned, most things are a mitochondrial inefficiency problem. Most ailments start on that mitochondrial level. And the reason why is because mitochondria are basically like the batteries of your cells. And if the batteries of your cells are losing their charge and they're not performing well, you're literally not going to perform well at a cellular level. And at that point, nothing works properly. And so this is why I talk so much about light and movement. People think about energy levels, like do I need more calories? Do I need more stimulants and caffeine? Or you even think about sleep. And those things obviously can play a role, and they do. But what people don't factor in terms of enhancing energy is light and movement. It's why I'm such a big proponent of standing desks and walking pads. Like I'm literally on my walking pad right now while I do this conversation with you. I get outside in the light probably 5 to 7 times a day, almost every hour to prime the pump. It's intentional. And because of that, my insulin sensitivity is very, very good. And because of that, all the chemistry in your body is so much better because you're not creating all this metabolic drag. So light, and especially if on a cloudy day or if it's dark, get some type of red light lamp, like a Hooga red light panel. Use that every day. I use it at nighttime when we're winding down. It can help with sleep enhancement. All that stuff. It's like food for your mitochondria, basically. Sleep quality is a key one. I've talked about sleep a lot. If you don't lock your sleep in and you stay up late, you'll definitely have issues. And so I would say you've got to get into a regular sleep-wake cycle. You've got to calm down your nervous system in the evening. I talk about this I believe it's in my episode 15 where I talk about burnout and chronic stress. I talk about calming your nervous system down so you can actually sleep better. So go listen to episode 15 because I dig deep into that. I would say other things that help with mitochondrial health is a bit of zone 2 cardio. So if you go to ChatGPT and plug in, how do I determine my zone 2 cardio heart rate? And it will give you some way to figure that out. You go do that and you make that your target, right? I would even say when you're looking at sleep quality, REM and deep sleep. So not just thinking about your total sleep, but where is your REM and deep sleep at? And because those sleep's in many ways like a metabolic reset. Now, there are some supplements that I will use as a sort of a stack. So I will use high doses of creatine. I'll use methylene blue, NAD plus, subcutaneous shots of NAD plus. So subcutaneous is like a little injection just below the skin. I'll also use peptides like MOTS-c, SS31. I find that stack of NAD, MOTS-c, SS31, and methylene blue and creatine with a double dose of omega-3s is a very, very good stack for starting to optimize the chemistry on a mitochondrial level. Now, everyone's a little bit different. You've got to try different things, but that's what I would be sort of thinking about from a mitochondrial perspective. Now, I would also tell you that things like stimulants, things like alcohol, things like throwing a bunch of nootropics at the problem. I often see this where people will get supplements and they'll take a lot of nootropics that are very sort of cholinergic, so that they have a lot of accelerator in the system, 5-HTP, these types of things. Now, there's nothing wrong with some of these things in the right person, but generally, I will try to find things that are more calming on the nervous system first. So I'll usually try to focus with GABA predominant things because most people need more calm. They don't need more accelerator. And so as long as we get the braking system down first, that's the first point of action. I would say nervous system regulation is a big one. And I really have focused on this a lot over the years. And again, I talk about that in episode 15 with the burnout stuff. But you can even kind of measure this if you have a smart device, you can see this in your heart rate variability, so your HRV. You can see this in your respiratory rate. You can see this in your resting heart rate. So if your resting heart rate is high and your HRV is low, that's a sign that your stress is spilling over. And so you need to make sure that I even will modify training volume off this. So some people, if their stress bucket is spilling over, I will do maybe weight training every second day. Instead of training 5 or 6 days a week, do it every second day or do 3 days a week. Sometimes you will get better results where you're tapering back and you're allowing more of a recovery process to take place. But I say this because your nervous system drives a lot of how you sleep, and it drives a lot of how your gut reacts. And those things all together seem to really do have quite an effect. Now, there's a whole other world of supplements that I'll just kind of give you some basic ones, but you've got to realize that this is why I would tell you to come into my rotation, because everyone's going to be different. Your testing scores will depend on you. That's why when people say, someone said so-and-so, this diet's the best one, or this supplement's the best one. It's like, based on what context? Like, did they get all your data from the blood work and the Braveman test and the food sensitivity and stuff? Because if they didn't, they're guessing, and that's useless. And so I would say in general, things like theanine. I'm a big fan of theanine serene. That's a good one for GABA and calming the nervous system. But things like tyrosine, things like theanine, ashwagandha, NAC, so N-acetylcysteine is like a precursor to glutathione. There are some peptides that can be worth testing. Things like C-Max, Silank, dihexa. One that I've used a lot that does take some skill is cerebrolysin. So cerebrolysin is a BDNF peptide, or a brain-derived neurotropic factor peptide. It literally helps regenerate the brain. I've used this with some of my students who had strokes, and massive recovery. Massive recovery. But you've got to know how to do it right. So I would tell you, don't just bootleg that stuff. But cerebrolysin is a really good one to help regenerate the brain if you've experienced any damage from psychiatric medications. Because I will tell you that I did have some long-term damage from stuff. My pituitary wasn't working very well at all. So I wasn't producing a lot of luteinizing and follicle stimulating hormone from my pituitary. And when I dug into the research, I could see that the long-term use of some of these medications I was on, it literally had that effect. And they didn't tell me this. So basically what it means in layman's terms is that I could have potentially made myself infertile by taking these things. And I didn't know that. And I don't even think they knew that, to be honest. And so that's why, for me personally, I tried a lot of herbal remedies and a lot of different things to try and normalize and optimize my sex hormones, my testosterone, and it didn't work because my pituitary was the part that was broken. And so for me, using a smart, intelligent, strategic TRT protocol got me operational in those key areas. So now all of a sudden, all those systems are working more effectively within those Goldilocks zones. And that had a big role. So I would say for a lot of people, you've got to get the hormones right. Now, whether you do testosterone replacement therapy if you're a guy or hormone replacement therapy if you're a woman, or you might be going through menopause, you have to get that right. If you just guess and avoid it, you will not feel good. It will have a negative effect. If you're a guy and you haven't dialed in your hormones and testosterone, you will not feel good. It's going to have a negative effect on your mood, absolutely. So when I tell you supplements like TRT protocols, hormone replacement therapy protocols for the women, things like bioregulator peptides, there are different bioregulators that I will often use with students to help try to maximize pituitary output with sex hormones without the need of doing hormone replacement. It can sometimes work for certain people. There are other things like enclomiphene citrate, which are sort of intermediary steps. Just know that there's multiple pathways that you can choose, but you've got to get those hormones right. And I would even say focusing on supplements that can help with blood glucose stability. So berberine is one that I like because it has that blood glucose sensitizing effect, which again ties back into that ADHD type stuff. Now, I would say outside the peptides and the bioregulators, outside some of the sort of over-the-counter supplementations and herbal compounds, the way you want to do this is a tapering process. First of all, you've got to communicate it to someone. You've got to let your doctor know. You've got to let your mentor know, because the worst thing you can do is just you're on a medication, you're using a peptide, and then you just stop and you don't say anything to anyone. That's not good. Do not do that, because you need to have people in your corner that understand the mechanisms of action to help you navigate what you might run into. So what I did was I learned all these things and I communicated with my psychiatrist, and he was actually on board, thank goodness. Some of them may not be, but you gotta just trust your instinct. And what I did was I did a tapering process. So in conjunction with doing all these testings, I started to taper down my dosage of my medications, like 10%, 20% at a time, like a quarter at a time, 25% for a week, 25% for another week, 25% for another week. So I was tapering in these increments. And what I did was, as I tapered in these increments, I would taper up like a supplement in the foods. And I would taper up the alternatives. So I'm like bridging the gap. I'm like creating another mechanism of action to help fill that void. And so I got to the point where on the last couple of weeks, I was taking a dose I was taking 25% of my dose every day, and then I was taking 25% of my dose every second day for a week, and then for the third week, I was taking 25% of my dose every third day, and then I literally got to the point where I was taking 25% dose once a week, and then I was done. So I tapered over probably about an 8 to 12 week period, and I tell you this, it felt effortless. Genuinely mean that. Most people have massive withdrawals from Ritalin and benzodiazepines. They're notorious. And I was able to get away from all of those things without any significant issues. And I genuinely think it's because I did this tapering process really well. So I'm very well versed in this. I made sure that I was training every day. I made sure that I had a nice regular sleep-wake cycle. I made sure that I was getting lots of light and movement every day to charge up that mitochondrial health. I made sure that I was doing a good base of multivitamin, multi-mineral supplement, a double dose of omega-3s, higher doses of creatine monohydrate as a base. I didn't know a lot about peptides back then, but now with the peptides, I would have been adding those things into. I'd have done the cerebral lysin. I would have probably used a little bit of CMAX. I would have used that stack that I mentioned, that mitochondrial stack. So MOTC, SS31, NAD, and methylene blue. I would have used that stack at least. I would have tested that. And I say this because when you realize that you have all the tools at your disposal to pull the levers to optimize your chemistry, you start to realize that you can get into flow states and you can achieve so much more than you ever thought. And I genuinely think that most diagnoses are just a chemical state that you're in temporarily, and we think it's some permanent disorder. We think it's some permanent disorder. And so I've been off all the psych meds now for 13 years. I feel like I perform at a pretty high level, and I sustain it. And so I would tell you, and the good thing about knowing this, guys, is that when you start to optimize the internal stuff, you're going to get a great physical result as a byproduct. My physical result is a byproduct of optimizing all these internal things. And so I would say, as a partner, as a parent, as an operator, as a professional, as a business owner, you need to see this as like a massive investment into yourself to optimize your chemical state so you can perform at the highest level, to get more done, to achieve more, to be a better version of yourself, so you can get all your workload done for the day, and then you have a lot of bandwidth to connect with your family at the end, and you're not giving them the burnt over leftovers, right? So you've got to recognize that this is a legacy play. This is an ROI play. So I would even tell you, just to close this off, when you're thinking about cost, you got to let go of this idea of, I can't afford that right now because I'm doing too many deals and I've got to wait for these deals to close and I've got to wait for this thing to sell. And you're just constantly putting it off, thinking that you aren't even an ROI. Part of the reason why your result is the way it is because you haven't changed the chemical state that you're in. You keep repeating this, you keep pumping the same chemical levers over and over and over again. And sometimes you won't even realize you're doing it. There'll be things you are realizing, and you won't be able to stop yourself because you don't understand how to course correct the brain chemistry to break the loop. That's very common. But when you understand some of these mechanisms of action, and you know, okay, I'm getting this type of trigger or this type of compulsion because I'm missing a certain thing, you can address that, you can plug that hole, and then all of a sudden that signal disappears. And then you start getting a better result. So, and the last thing I would tell you, this is something I should have probably stated at the beginning. You've got to get an environment with positive, ambitious people. If you do all of this stuff that I've been talking about, but you are negative, complaining, you're around a bunch of losers that just want to whine and complain and rant about politics and be victims, you're going to have a really hard time truly breaking through. So that's also why I talk about getting into masterminds, getting into mentorships, getting around people who have the result you want, get into proximity to them, and study them. How do they move? What do they post every day? How do they show up in the world? What type of conversations do they have? And lean into that. You've got to lean into your faith. You've got to lean into focusing on the reframe. You've got to lean into having good conversations. You've got to lean into being of service to other people. You've got to lean into saying, how can I help someone else today, and not just think about what's in it for me? People that are struggling the most mentally, they typically have me dialogue. How can you flip that and be of service to more people? Because you will help them today. They'll be very appreciative of that. It's going to fill up your cup, and you'll get that energy back into your life. And that's that lighthouse energy, man. That's that lighthouse energy. So go out there today. Start this process. Even if you are not on psych meds, do these things. Pull these levers. You need to see it as like a moral obligation to yourself, your family, your community to get optimized. Because we have a world full of losers and sadistic beta males and train wrecks. And I want and know that you've listened this far because you are not like that. So now it's a matter of taking that theory and applying it and getting that practical result. So go out there, apply it, and be that business athlete that you know you must become.